And I love doing these types of events because I can talk to people all over the country, all over the world sometimes. And I find that no matter where you live, your questions about dementia care are often shared by many others in the room at the time. So no, there exists no dumb questions. I've been asked a ton of questions about dementia. I've never been asked a dumb one, maybe once, but generally I've never been asked a dumb question. So if you have questions at the end, please, please, please do ask. Always, it takes a little bit for the first person to feel comfortable to ask a question. So major invisible bonus points to you if you ask the first question or have the first story, scenario, comment, whatever it is. All right, here we go. You're welcome, by the way, to keep your audio on, meaning you're allowed to, keep yourself unmuted unless, of course, there's a lot of noise going on in the background. You're at work, you've got barking dogs, you've got whatever. Then I would just ask that you do mute yourself just so it doesn't distract everybody else. Cool. Here we go. So let's talking about communication. When I first started in dementia care, I was kind of thrown into the world. So, I have a master's in gerontology, which is the study of aging. But if you've been to grad school, and I'm sure some of you have, you know that while you can get a great, very niche education, it doesn't really prepare you for the real world most of the time. I think it's very hard for school to prepare you for the real world unless you're actually physically doing the thing you're going to be doing. And I was not. While I did have internships in dementia care specifically, I hadn't worked in that world 24/7 until suddenly I was. So my first job was as a dementia care director of sorts, whatever my title was, at a Brookdale building in North Carolina. And that was is a pretty large senior living company and was a pretty large building. So I had at any given time between 30 and 40 residents living with dementia. And I was in charge of pretty much what happened with my residents all day. And that was a big job, especially at 24 years old and being fairly new, outside of out of grad school, and just taking over and doing this job. So when I first started in dementia care, I had, internships and I had a master's in gerontology, but it wasn't until I was really in it where I started to be able to apply the things that I was learning. But we all pretty much learn the same things about dementia in, any sort of class, or you go to a seminar, you go to some sort of educational workshop, and you're pretty much taught the same things. And so here's pretty much the things that we learned. First of all, hopefully you learn not to reorient. So reorientation is to say something like, don't you remember, you're 85 years old and your parents died years ago and you live in, assisted living. Hopefully we learn not to do that. Although I have, over the past couple of years, this same school, they're actually based in Pittsburgh, has brought me, or outside of Pittsburgh, has brought me in this past time or two, we're virtual, to lecture to the nursing students. And the instructor is great because she knows to bring me in. And she said, all right, guys, remember, learn from Rachael, use her tips in practice, but on the test, make sure you do the opposite of what she's telling you. And I said, wait, what? What are we doing? And she was like, well, the test, they teach reorientation in school. So the textbook says, you have to correct the people living with dementia. So remember on the test to write what the test wants, but, on your nursing exam, do that. But in practice, do what Rachel's telling you. And that blew my mind. I had no idea that that was still being taught and that was still the accepted practice of doing that. The only clue that I had before that course was pretty much anytime I did a live event and there were nurses in the audience, someone who'd been in nursing for a long time would come up to me and say, I learned reorientation in school, got out on the floor, realized it was horrible because I'm just constantly correcting my residents or my patients all day, every day, getting into huge fights with people, and then realizing over time I needed to change my approach. That was my only clue. I didn't realize it was still being taught. So there you go. But other than that, typically what people learn are these things: redirection, distraction, validation. Redirection would be if someone was like, where's my mom? You could say, sounds like your mom was a great baker. Let's talk about that. Distraction. I don't know. Let's go do this instead. Validation would be you saying, sounds like you miss your mom, which is about as close as methods that I've found over the years get to what I teach. The challenge with all of these methods is that they literally say never to lie to a person with dementia. That gets really complicated to teach people because you're really inviting a lot of black and white, like don't lie, into this whole conversation. But communication, something you do every day with people, is a gray area, right? I mean, there's no black and white formula for how to make a conversation go exactly the way that you planned that it would go. So saying like never lie to somebody with dementia is pretty confusing. That's where I came to this piece. That's where I created this phrase, embracing their reality. I've talked to a lot of people in dementia care, and I've not ever had anyone explain this exactly the way that I'm explaining it to you today. So that's what I've come to. So I started kind of working on this concept back in 2014. So my first job at that Brookdale community, I was using all of those techniques I just talked about. I was using validation. I was using, somebody just came in. I was using validation. I was using redirection. I was using distraction, but I wasn't really finding that they were totally working. You know, they kind of worked, but they didn't really leave me feeling like I'd actually been successful, like I'd actually done anything to make this person's day better. And in fact, one day I had a woman ask me where her mom was. And I said something to the effect of, you know, I don't know. It sounds like you miss your mom. And she was like, yeah, obviously. Why does no one around here ever answer my questions? And that was like such a light bulb moment for me, because I'm thinking, oh, wow, you're right. No one answers your questions. They just kind of circumvent the question because they don't want to, quote unquote, lie to you. So that was a real light bulb moment for me. And that's where I started thinking, okay, there's got to be like something we can do here, right? There's got to be something that we can do to improve our communication. So one day in particular, I had a resident who went out on our community's bus to go to her doctor's appointment. And she was part of a program called PACE, post-acute care for the elderly. So she would go out to these appointments and come back. The problem with this was this woman was like in a really difficult place in her cognitive loss. She was aware enough to make a really good argument as to why something was wrong, but she was just confused enough to be confused about facts. So her name was Eileen. Eileen went out on the bus, and when she came back to our community, she refused to get off of it. She believed that the bus was supposed to take her to her house, which made sense because she used to ride the bus around town, and the bus would take her, you know, pick her up from her house, take her out to appointments and bring her back. So she didn't want to get off at our community. I was eventually called in after about 30 minutes of the staff trying to get her off the bus. I was brought in to see if I could get her off the bus. I used all of my, you know, techniques to try to get her off the bus and, you know, try to like calmly get her off the subject of like, this was her house. But Eileen was fixated. And Eileen was just, I mean, a delightful person. I really, really liked Eileen. But she was like this little British lady And she was just like, had a delightful, dry British humor. And she was so snarky and so sarcastic. And there was no way that she was getting off that bus. So what I did eventually, after trying everything that I thought of, was asking the bus driver to drive us around the block a little bit and then drive us to the back of the building. During that drive around, I just talked with her. We kind of, we bounced around from subject to subject. Finally, we get to the back of the building and I said, Eileen, here's the situation. This bus is on a very specific route. It only goes to certain places. We have to get off of this bus and get on another bus to take you home. But for right now, let's get off this bus. We'll go in here. We'll get something to eat. We'll hang out for a little bit and then we can get going later. Finally, she got off the bus. Got her inside. We got her some dinner. Everybody's fine. I, of course, was totally emotionally exhausted and drained. And I'm driving home and I'm thinking to myself, wait a second. I just lied to her. Right? But then it was the only thing that worked. So what does that mean? What does that mean? So what I did was I chose what was true for her reality. Trying to convince her that her reality was wrong, trying to just like validate her feelings or distract her was not working. So I did what was true for her. That was what happened. And when I finally came to this realization, I was like, wait a second, why aren't we teaching this? Right? I actually got home, went on LinkedIn and sent a message to Teepa Snow because she is when people think dementia care, they typically think Teepa Snow. So I sent a message to Teepa Snow and I said, look, here's my situation. And she got back to me and she said, and actually she lives in North Carolina as well. So we were actually in the same state. And she said, well, sounds like you did what you needed to do. And I was like, wait a second. I literally just watched one of your videos the other day and you said never lie. So what's the deal? What do we do? So that's when I started working on this concept of embracing someone's reality, right? So let's take another example. We've got a resident, we've got a patient, we've got a loved one, we've got whoever. She's 83. She retired at 67 and her parents died years ago. But in her reality, she's 38. She's in the prime of her career and her parents live nearby. So what do? We got to go to her world. And this is really hard for a lot of people. And I've definitely gotten pushback on this concept. Well, what do you do about this thing? And what do you do about that? Look, if you're doing what's true for that person, you're not lying. You're not making it up. You're not doing something bad. You're not doing something evil. You're living in their world. And I'm going to demonstrate to you exactly how to do this. And I'm going to do it in a way that's not going to paint you into a corner. So you're going to go, oops, I shouldn't have said X, Y, and Z. I'm going to actually tell you exactly what to do. Before I do that, I'm going to tell you what embracing their reality is not. This is the thing about embracing their reality. This is the thing about dementia care communication. Is it super, super duper niche, right? It's super duper niche. And it's very hard for people to sometimes extract different concepts from one another. So embracing their reality isn't therapeutic lying. Embracing their reality is not fiblets. I hate this word. Fiblets sounds like a part of a turkey to me, right? So it's not fiblets. It's not therapeutic lying. It's not white lies. And the reason that I hate all of these phrases is because you're still using the word lying. You're still saying fib. You're still saying, untruths. And that's really important because I think that's what a lot of people respond to is they go, well, I don't want to lie. And the phrase therapeutic lying doesn't sound any better because the word therapeutic is in front of it. It still sounds negative. And nomenclature is so important. How you talk about something defines that thing. And so if you spend a lot of time calling it therapeutic lying or fiblets or white lies or untruths, it's going to be really hard for people to distinguish what embracing their reality really means. And it means that you're doing what's true for that person. But first, you got to find out what that true thing is. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. The other thing that it's not is validation. Validation, and I've gotten into deep discussions about this with people, especially on LinkedIn and after conferences and things. Validation, they always tell you, quote unquote, not to lie. To me, that brings up a lot of questions. Okay, well, what do you do now? Okay, if you can't lie, what do you do? And they won't fully go into the world of the person living with dementia, because to a lot of people, again, that feels like a lie. It's not redirecting or distracting. Lying sounds bad. Lying feels bad. So if we take that word and we throw it out the window, replace it entirely with the phrase of embracing their reality, because embracing someone's reality sounds good. Therapeutic lying doesn't really sound that great. Fiblets doesn't sound great. White lies doesn't sound great. You still have at its core the phrase lying. So you're not lying or making anything up when you're doing what's true for them. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. And communication is key, right? If you're embracing someone's reality, you're letting go of any need that you have to be right about a thing. That's a hard thing for a lot of people too. If you're somebody who feels like you constantly need to be right about stuff, or you have to present like the logical argument, you're going to have a really hard time with this concept. When I've taught this, and for the first time in like over a year, I'm finally, cross my fingers, going to be able to talk about this in real life. This is real life, but you know what I mean. On a stage, not sitting in my desk chair next month. And always when I've presented this type of topic, the people who have the hardest time with it are the people who are very by the book logic based. So somebody who is a mathematician, like somebody who's an accountant, somebody who's some sort of researcher, scientist, they really like things in neat boxes. And I get that, but this is not a neat box. This is a gray area situation. This is an art form. You have to understand what is real for the person living with dementia and respond in a way that would make sense in that reality. And always, and this is something I really miss about those live events, is you could watch people's faces and you could watch the people who are like, yeah, I'm getting it. And always at the end, you know, somebody would be like, okay, but what do you do in this exact situation? And I would just reiterate what I've been talking about the whole time. And they're like, and I would say, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm an accountant. And I was like, and there it is. Just people who are very hardcore logic have a hard time with this. So here are those 3 questions, those things I've been teasing this entire time, stuff you're actually going to use to embrace someone's reality appropriately. So here's your 3 questions. Where do you think they are? When someone's asking, where's my so-and-so, we're going to ask, where do you think she is? And I'm going to go into a lot of detail on these in a second, so don't stress if you miss them. What do you think about this when you're introducing a stuffed animal or baby doll? And I always do this. I always forget my props across the room. So I'll be right back in like 1 second. I'm going to get my props. Okay. I've got my baby. I've got my pet. One time this really freaked me out. I had it in the corner over here and I forgot that the baby was here, and I turned and saw the baby and I was like, oh, yeah. That was an interesting moment. So what do you think about this when you're introducing a stuffed animal or baby doll? And can you help me when you're introducing an activity? All of these are options to help you find where someone's world is and go there without introducing your own reality into it. I don't care what your reality is. The person living with dementia doesn't care what your reality is. What is important is their reality and how you can go over there. But these questions help you because you can't go to somebody's reality unless you know where it lives. You can't just get in the car and drive when you don't know what the destination is. So for this first one, where do you think they are? Here's what you're doing. You're finding out where their reality is, and then you're going there. And here's the key. When you're saying, when they're saying, where are my parents? And you're saying, where do you think they are? And they say, oh, I think they're at work. You're just going to go, yeah, probably so. This feels a lot better than feeling like you're lying. One, because you're not. And two, gives you an opportunity to not paint yourself into a corner. Because here's what we don't want to do. We don't want to assume that their reality is the same as it was yesterday, right? We don't want to assume that their reality is where it was yesterday. And if their reality is the same, well, that's great. But I taught this one time to a class, and I had a gentleman come in, and he said, well, Rachel, I did this. I embraced my mom's reality, and it didn't work. And I was like, okay, give me a little bit of detail about this. And he said, well, you said that if my mom is talking about, her mom, to go along with it and to agree that her mom's alive. And I was like, yes. He said, well, last week, that's where she thought her mom was alive. And so I just went along with that, embraced her reality. Okay. And he said, but yesterday I went to go see my mom, and I went in there talking about her mom, and she was really confused. And she was like, what are you talking about? My mom died years ago. And I said, okay, you illustrated a fantastic point, which is you assumed that her reality was the same place it was in last week, but it wasn't in that place anymore. So you needed to stop, pause, take a breath, assess where her reality was. That could have been you actually asking, where do you think your mom is? Or just listening before speaking. That's another key to communication, just in general, is to listen before you speak. And so that was the problem there. Here's another option with this one, is if the person you're talking to is a parent or another close relative, and they say to you, hey, where's your brother? I haven't talked, I don't know where he is. He hasn't called in a bit. And perhaps your brother died a few years ago. You would know where your brother was. So another option for you is to say, I haven't talked to him in a while. This immediately gets you off the hook, because if mom says, well, didn't he die? You're going to say, yeah, I feel when I'm praying, I think about him, or I just, anytime I'm having a conversation in my head, I feel like it's with him, and that's probably true, right? For a close relative. And she may just hear it at face value and go, yep, I haven't talked to him either. Okay. And leave it there. And that's fine. But again, we want to avoid painting ourselves into a corner by making an assumption that we know where somebody's reality is when we haven't even taken the time to listen. What do you think about this? I've got my friends, right? I've got my friends. When we're introducing a baby doll or a stuffed animal, we want to say, what do you think about this? Right? Not go, here, look at this baby. Because they might be like, what are you talking about? That's a baby doll. Right? So we don't want to make the assumption that we know where someone's reality is. This just allows the person to show you their reality. So I love to do this. I love to say, what do you think about this? And they'll go, oh, a dog. Or they'll say, oh, that's a cute stuffed animal. Either way is correct. And then all you're going to do is go, yep. Right? If they say, why do you have that? Oh, well, I was thinking, my niece would really like it, or whatever you want to say, right? Again, we don't want anybody to feel crazy, and we don't want you to feel crazy either. And can you help me when you're starting a program or activity? What we don't want to do is just be like, here, do this, right? Or do you want to? Do you want to does not work. And you know that if you have a loved one with dementia. Do you want to do this? No, they don't want to do that thing. This doesn't really work in real life either. Use this trick. Can you help me is a great way to get people to feel involved in your situation. You're making, again, this doesn't have to be just people living with dementia. It could be anybody. Ask people for help. It makes them feel useful. It makes them feel important. Most people are bystanders. just to some inherent degree. Yeah, this is also why if you ever taken like a self-defense class, they teach you if you're being mugged or something to not say like, hey, somebody help, because most people will not get involved, but to like point to somebody and be like, guy in the blue shirt, come help me. Or if you want people to call 911, assign people things. Hey, you need to call 911. You need to walk down the street to see if you can get some help. Sometimes people need a leader, but also it involves people specifically in the situation. It makes them feel personally responsible for what's going on. And that's to some degree what you're doing here as well. Can you help me? Makes people feel like, yeah, okay. People like to feel helpful. People don't always want to do the thing that you want them to do. Here's some additional tips. And these come from a thing called the Black Swan Group, which is a negotiation group. So this guy, Chris Voss, is a former FBI hostage negotiator, but now he teaches business negotiation. And he is very interesting, fantastic to listen to. And I found that as I'm listening to him, I'm also learning some things that apply in dementia care as well. One of the things you want to do is use mirroring to your advantage, just in general conversation, but also with people living with dementia. And this involves body language and the last three words that they say. This works wonders if the person, especially if the person has some aphasia and has some trouble communicating verbally. You can repeat the last three things that they said, and it makes people feel heard and listened to. Again, use this in your normal everyday life. You don't have to just use it in dementia. And I'll give you an example. So somebody says, oh yeah, I went to the mall today. Yeah, I went to the mall today and blah, blah, blah. People feel inclined to elaborate when you've repeated the last three words. I taught my dad this, and then he just kept doing it to me over and over again. So that was a little bit annoying, but generally it's a fun thing to try with your colleagues and to teach this kind of mirroring. Mirroring is also great for body language. I've done this very often communicating with people who have trouble communicating verbally. I mirror their body language, and that goes a very long way with communication. A lot of our communication is nonverbal, right? So doing that makes people feel like you're in sync, and that's very comforting. So again, I just side note, recommend checking out Chris Voss's work on negotiation. It's very interesting if you're interested in communication in general as an art form, super interesting stuff. He also has something called the late night FM DJ voice that he used to use during hostage negotiating, which was where he would just talk really slow, but comforting at the same time, and so you're moving through your language. And that's also something I found that I do when I'm talking to people living with dementia. I don't always speak at this clip, but that I slow down my speech. I go, comfortably into talking. I'm not, trying to force anything onto anybody, but I sound comfortable, I sound confident, and I sound open to having a conversation. And that's a great way to do that same kind of thing for a dementia-related conversation. And when it comes down to it, your truth, the truth that you're bringing into your conversation is not really that important. The facts that you have, the facts of the case, right? Like, hey, you have a doctor's appointment at 2:00 today, remember? The facts of the case really aren't that important. What is important is the feeling associated with it. And so you don't want to convey your truth, but you do want to convey the feeling of positivity. And this comes down to that quote that's often attributed to Maya Angelou, which goes something like, and I'm going to paraphrase, people aren't always going to remember what you said, but they're going to remember how you made them feel. And that is so true in dementia care communication. The people who have the best relationships with their residents or, whoever, give off a comforting vibe. I have often found in my own life that I attract people living with dementia. there have been a number of situations recently, and then just also throughout the last number of years, that if I'm in a doctor's office, I'm in some sort of other public place, I will end up talking to the one person in the room who's living with dementia. And that is verified. I know, because a lot of times a family will come up and I'll get into a conversation with them as well. But there's just something about, I think, an energy that you give off that's really important here. So what do you do when, like, people ask me this all the time, but why are they doing this or saying that or acting like this? You know, I just don't get it. I don't get it. Why are they doing that? The why is not going to satisfy you. It's really not. While you can be curious about it, why is my dad, you know, keep saying this same thing? Or why is my husband so fixated on putting everything into one drawer? Like, I don't get it. The why is not going to make you feel better. It's really not. Don't worry about the why behind the dementia-related behavior. Worry about how you can make everything more positive by bringing their reality fully around to them, right? So you're not trying to bring your own reality into the situation, and don't get caught up worrying like, I don't get why they feel this way. Doesn't matter. I had there were two women who came to a talk of mine like 4 years ago, and they raised their hands and they were like, this is, you know, my sister's here with me. Our dad has dementia. Our mom died a couple of years ago. And he is convinced that mom went to the hospital in a trash truck. And he's really angry about it. He's so upset about it. Why? Why does he think that she went to the hospital in a trash truck? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it really could be anything, but his brain has created a story for him for whatever reason. But the why is not going to solve your problem. Even if you figure out the why, you're not going to be like, oh, I get it now. It's not ever going to make sense. Don't worry about the why. What matters is how he feels. And if he feels anxious or upset about it, that's what you can work with. That's the conversation you can have. So here's some questions I'm asked about embracing their reality. How is this different than validation and other types of communication? If you're not sold on that yet, I don't know what to tell you. I've clearly done a bad job explaining this. Won't agreeing with their delusions make them decline faster? No, there is no evidence to support this. And in fact, I'd like to present the argument that if you continue going, no, you're wrong, here's the reality that we're dealing with, that would probably cause more harm than not, right? That would probably be pretty painful. If you're constantly being told, no, you're wrong. I think that would make somebody decline faster. When their speech doesn't make sense, what do I say back? Body language, like I talked about earlier, and agreement goes a long way. I have had full conversations with people who cannot speak because I do all the talking, but I also do a lot of nonverbal listening, right? I had a fantastic relationship with one of my residents who really could not communicate verbally, but she loved me and I loved her. And she really didn't have a relationship with the other staff members. Like when she saw me, she'd be like, you know, and she'd come over and she'd mouth things, you know, she would like touch me, you know, she'd smile. Had a great sense of humor, especially for somebody who really couldn't speak. She didn't know she couldn't speak. But she would always come over to me. And it's because we talked, we communicated. What if their reality changes? Well, that's why we ask where their reality is. And even if we don't ask exactly where it is, like, where do you think your parents are? We assess. We take the time to use context clues and to listen and to go, oh, they think X, Y, and Z today. Okay, that's what we're going to do. Do I tell them if someone just died? That's a definite no. That's a no-go. That's a no. I wouldn't do it. It's not going to make them feel better. They're not going to remember it. You're not going to like it. It's going to be upsetting. It's going to be a bad time. It's going to be a bad time. When we grieve, what do we need? We need time, and we need the ability to process time, and we need some space. People living with dementia do not have the ability to process time, and therefore cannot process grief the way that they need to, right? So if we're just bringing this into them, like, hey, your sister died, it's like, whoa, because every time they hear it, they're reliving it again. There's been no space, there's been no time for being able to get away from the grief. Do I tell them do I tell them I sold their house? No, no, please don't do that. We're back in the same spot. You're probably gonna, bring on some feelings of grief. We do not want to do any of that. We never want to introduce something that the person's going to have to deal with, right? And that's really what embracing their reality is about. How do we avoid introducing something just for that person to deal with? How do we help them in their reality solve whatever it is? And this is also a question. Usually do I tell them I sold their house leads into, well, I need to move them to, dementia care. I need to move them to memory care. Do I tell them? No. Okay. It's the same kind of thing. We do not need to convince a person living with dementia that they have to move to memory care. It's not going to make them feel better. It's not going to make you feel better. It's not going to provide the satisfaction that you're hoping it's going to provide. It's just not going to. So what we want to do instead is work within the confines of their reality when we're making a huge transition, like transitioning someone to memory care. So what we want to do is we want to offer a couple of things to them. We want to suggest that it's a third party wanting them to move. The doctor is a great example. The doctor really wants you to stay here until, name something physical that they can see, not their brain, right? They can't see this. Until your ankle feels better, it'll probably be a few weeks. Or you can just leave it at until it feels better, or until it looks better, or until the doctor sees you again. We're introducing a short amount of time, an undefined, but a short amount of time. Blaming it on a third party and not ourselves or their brain. And then again, not blaming it on the thing they can't see, which is dementia, which is their brain. So this is in steep contrast to, Mom, you have to move to memory care. I can't take care of you anymore. You have dementia. You forget everything and I can't deal with it. Whoa, that's a lot. That's a very different sentence than, here's what we're doing. Work within the confines of the reality that they're able to work with you in, not your reality. Your reality not going to solve the problem here. So I want to make sure that I'm able to get into questions, because literally I could talk about this all day, and I will, and I have. So I want to make sure I have plenty of time here. I do see something in the chat, but I kind of have